When Cyberpunk 2077 first released in December of 2020, it was the laughingstock of the gaming community as a whole, akin to something like Fallout 76, Anthem, or even the Avengers. The game was unpolished, buggy, and clearly not ready for release, especially on last-gen consoles. I've always thought, even though the game had its problems, that it had plenty of merits and that the core gameplay loop, the writing, the animations, and overall most of the game, other than the technical state, has been very strong and very enjoyable. But the glitches held it back at every turn, whether it was combat, story, or exploration, made all of these experiences less than they could have been, and some of them downright unenjoyable. But finally, over a year after the game's release, as of about a week ago, we finally have patch 1.5, Cyberpunk's next-gen patch. Welcome to the Bravosity. I'm Brevin, and this is another Cyberpunk 2077 analysis video. It's a bit different than my quest analysis video series that I've been doing. As this isn't scripted, you can probably tell I'm not the greatest when I'm going off script here. But I really wanted to sit down and just discuss the newest patch, the next-gen patch, as if I'm going to continue making videos on Cyberpunk, this is the turning point, and this is an extremely significant thing in the just the life of this game and the direction it's going to take. So looking at the patch, the first thing I wanted to talk about, the first thing on everyone's mind, of course, is the performance and the bugs on the next-gen consoles. I played it on an Xbox Series S, so I'm at the bottom of the bracket. But even at the lowest end of this next console generation with the Series S, I've already noticed a significant improvement in the game in every part of it. The level of detail, the frame rate, the overall performance has just been improved exponentially. There's a sharpness to the menu and the detail of everything that it just wasn't there before on the last gen version, even backwards compatible, playing it on the new consoles. It's a big step up. The lighting as well. On my Series S and even the Series X and PS5, before this patch, there was a lot of problems, a lot of issues with rendering, with pop-in was one thing that a lot of people had an issue with, frame rate, and most of these are gone or just heavily mitigated. I've noticed barely any pop-in on my Series S, and rendering issues are nearly non-existent as well. We have larger crowds as well as more traffic, and even with this, I haven't ran into any of the rendering issues with people that we would see on the last-gen versions, where they would just be like an amorphous blob for a minute before they fully rendered in and you could see all the details of their character. And so it's really nice to see that. It's really nice to see that the performance overall is a huge step up, and when talking about bugs, it's a huge step up as well. The list on the patch notes of bug fixes is huge. We have quest fixes, side job fixes, gig fixes. We have all kinds of perk and just smaller glitch fixes. Just an absolute huge list of bug fixes and even some rebalancing, which we'll talk about here a little bit later. But overall, in regards to performance and bugs, it is fantastic what they managed to do here. And it should be said that this is how the game should have released, of course. The state it released in was unacceptable, and this right here just shows the game never really should have been released on last gen. It shouldn't have been released on the Xbox One, shouldn't have been released on the PlayStation 4, and we can really see that here with the next gen versions and how they run pretty excellently and can clearly support this game and run Cyberpunk at an acceptable state. Overall, just really excellent and a big step up from what we had before. There are still bugs. I've ran into a few. There's still problems. Frame rate on the Series S is a little worse than I would like it to be, but with how massive Cyberpunk is and with the low-end specs that I'm running with on the Series S, it's fine. I don't have a problem with it, and it never affected my gameplay negatively, I don't think. But moving on from the bugs and the performance, let's talk about some of the major changes that they've made, because this isn't just a bug fixing patch. With this next gen patch, they've also brought us some major changes, quality of life fixes, and some small DLCs. So starting with the major changes, we have the better crowds. I touched a little bit on this in the performance section, but the better crowds are excellent. We have much larger crowds than we saw before on console, but we also have just better AI for each of the NPCs walking around, and I believe whatever they use to select to spawn in different kinds of people is better, but you don't see the same characters quite as often. And that works really nicely. There's this new little leaning effect whenever you walk by a person. It's okay. It's a little bit immersive, and that's what we'll see with a lot of the big changes that they've made and some of the fixes they've made, is that one thing that they really want to focus on moving forward, and I mean something they've wanted to focus on since launch, is immersion, and trying to get you immersed in the world of Cyberpunk in Night City, and trying to get you into the shoes of V, of course. And I like this a lot. I want to see more changes that lead to a more immersive world and just allow us to do more in the world. And continuing in this vein, we have better traffic as well. Cars their pathfinding is a little bit better. They can get around if you leave a car in the middle of the road. Supposedly they can get around it better, but I have seen it's still not great. It's definitely still needs some work. But it is better than before, and with more cars driving on the road, it's definitely necessary, and it's a decent improvement. So another thing we have is that some civilians will now fight back when attacked, whether they come at you with a weapon or just punching. It's nice to see more of the people of Night City defending themselves, as it's a really rough city, and there's a lot of people I see that I would imagine would defend themselves rather than just running away scared, and it seems like something that would happen more often in Night City than it did before, and I'm glad to see it. Most of them are pushovers, to be honest, but at least they do attack you back and they don't just roll over. So one of the largest changes we see is the fixer reputation system, and this is one of my favorite changes that they've made of all the changes. So what this does is, even previously in the game, each of the different districts has a special fixer, which gives you gigs, which are like side missions, but a bit smaller. They're one level step down from side missions. Before, as soon as you got into the game, there was just gigs all over the place. There was icons all over your map, and it was a bit overwhelming. You're just really thrown into the deep end. Now, instead of getting all these gigs at once, you're given a handful of gigs for each fixer at a time, and as you complete a certain number of gigs, you reach another level of reputation with that fixer, and then you're given more gigs that are a bit more advanced. I really like this change, as it makes you feel more of a connection to each of the fixers in the districts, and it doesn't overwhelm you as much with so many gigs right at the start, instead handing them out as you complete them. So overall, I really like that change. On top of this, we have perk changes. So a lot of the perks have been changed, just to make them work better or to rebalance them. So far, from what I've experienced of the game, I do like the perk changes, and the overall balancing changes are really good. Most situations are more difficult. Most builds have been nerfed to an extent, and the game is just a bit more difficult, a bit more balanced overall. Continuing with rebalancing, there's also a lot of price changes to weapons and mods. Most cars have been made a bit cheaper, and talking about cars, there have been some driving changes. There's actually a wide list of driving changes. Overall, I felt the driving on controller, which is what I played with at least, doesn't feel good still. It still feels pretty bad. You still feel like you're gonna fishtail it a lot. It's kind of finicky. Although crashes do feel more impactful, it seems, when you run into things and stuff like that. Cars don't quite feel as rubbery as they used to. But overall, I still think the driving needs work. The only other major change we have is to clothing mods, which they changed a lot with this, how many mods you can put on each piece of clothing, how some of the mods work, and because of this, as well as the perk changes, all of your clothing mods were taken off your clothes and put back into your inventory, as well as all of your perks have been removed, and you'll have to replace all of those. You'll have to respec your character. So those are all the major changes, and mostly I think that they're really good. The driving changes could use some work, but I really like most of the major changes that they've made there. Moving on to some of the bit of smaller changes, we have the quality of life fixes. There's some really good stuff here. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is the map, and this is one thing that I think they've done a really excellent job with. There are now multiple filters you can use that allow you to get to see exactly what you need, whether it be Ripper Dock, stores, missions, specific mission types, whatever you need, you can now filter those in and filter everything else out. And you can pick which, what you want filtered in, what you want filtered out, and it's just a really excellent customizable system. The dynamic map mode, which is basically how the map used to be, is a lot better, and they changed some of the icons, like the icons for gigs, to make it more readable, more digestible, and I think overall the map changes are excellent. They're really good. Any new players coming in are going to feel right at home with this map design, and it just makes everything a lot easier. So the only other quality of life changes are some small UI changes to the perk screen, and some UI changes in other places, which overall I think don't add too much, but I think they're better than they used to be. The last quality of life change I want to talk about is one that I know a lot of people will enjoy, and that's being able to not answer the phone on calls that aren't necessary for main and side quests. So all of those gig calls you get, or just any smaller calls, you cannot answer if you want to. If you're tired of hearing Regina Jones or Wakako talk to you, then it's up to you to not answer the phone. So, moving on from quality of life changes, we have the DLC. Not expansions, not any sort of story additions, any new gigs or quests, just some smaller DLCs. So the first thing on this is appearance customization. If you go to the mirror in your home, I don't think there are any other mirrors that you could change your appearance in. But if you go to the mirror in your apartment, which we'll talk about here in a second, you can now change your appearance. You actually can't change like your facial structure or anything. It's just your hair, tattoos, eye color, things like that is what you can change, and it's a nice little feature. With this being this like cybernetic world and everything, I don't understand why we couldn't just also get like plastic surgery, change our face structure and stuff. It would be nice to maybe go to a Ripper Dock and be able to change our facial structure and just the way our character looks. But overall, I do like the fact that we can change our hair, tattoos, eye color, and things like that. So, talking about apartments, there are now new apartments you can buy, as well as some small apartment customization you can do. You can change the color scheme. My favorite being this vault tech looking color scheme right here, this yellow and blue. I really like this. But there are 5 new apartments, I believe, or 5 apartments altogether, and they range from poor, crappy looking little apartments to the richer, more expensive apartments. But overall, they're pretty nice, offering more of that immersion, more of that little bit of role-playing you can get into with your apartment, and adding a little bit of character. And continuing talking about the immersion and the role-playing in the game, we now have extended romances. So the previous romances, Pan Am, Judy, and the police detective, I forget his name, now you can continue that romance with regular visits where you can sleep with your partner more often, and they will text you, and I think I heard Pan Am could send nudes or some stuff. So if you're into the romance in the game, there's a bit more of that and more ways to interact with your romantic partner. But the last 2 DLC items move a little bit away from the immersion and talking more about combat. We have 2 new guns, and we have some new attachments, muzzle brakes, as well as some new scopes. And it's nice to see muzzle brakes. We didn't have that before, so if you didn't want a silencer, your barrel attachment was basically moot. You just didn't put anything on there. It's nice to have something to put on there. The two new guns are pretty decent, fun to use, and a nice addition to the game. But that's all the DLCs. There's nothing really significant or anything that's going to add gameplay time. It's going to add too much gameplay time or get people to come back, I don't think. If you're not already interested in playing the old content again, then there's not much here for you to experience, not much new at least. Overall, the Next Gen patch offers a lot of changes, a lot of fixes, and a little bit of additions with the DLCs and some of the other additions. It's a lot better. It's what I think personally the game should have been when it launched. It shouldn't have launched on last gen. It should have only launched on this generation of consoles, the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5, because if it would have launched in the current state it's in, I think it would have been a very different reaction to the fans, and I think we would look at Cyberpunk a lot differently. I think it would have a lot more respect among the gaming community. Whereas, even though I think this patch will go down as the big moment where Cyberpunk was fixed, where people started to get into the game again, and it started to garner a reputation more akin to The Witcher 3, I don't think it's ever going to be looked at as fondly as it would have been, or respected as much as it would have been if it would have released in this state, and rightfully so. Even with all these fixes and all the positives of patch 1.5 of this next gen patch, there's still some major issues that I think need addressed and fixing in later patches, and that bring down the game in its current state. So the first thing I want to talk about is that there's still only one LMG in the entire game. It's a bit of a travesty that an entire class of weapons is relegated to one weapon. You could find different rarities. You could find a blue, purple, and legendary gold rarity, as well as an iconic version. But it's just ridiculous that they only have one LMG in the entire game, especially when they're adding weapons in this patch and we still don't have another LMG. They still haven't added another LMG. It just blows my mind that you can have an entire class of weapons with just one gun. Compared that to the all the weapons in the assault tree, the submachine guns, rifles, sniper rifles. There's plenty of those. There's 5 or more of each of those weapons, and it's just a bit ridiculous that there's only one LMG, as it really shafts Annihilation players who are already being a little bit shafted, as Assault just has way more weapon types and way more at their disposal. But Assault's shafting all of the weapon types, and that's a bit of a discussion for probably a different video. So now that my LMG rant's out of the way, let's talk about car chases and the policing system, because in my opinion these are two things that go hand in hand. So in Cyberpunk's story, as well as a few side jobs, I believe, there are a few car chases, with V being in the passenger seat and shooting from that position. And these are all scripted events. In the open world, we never see any enemies driving cars, I don't believe, and there is no car chase AI. You will never be chased by a car in the open world, and this becomes a big problem when it comes to the policing system. Because not only does it cause the problem where they just seem to sort of spawn out of nowhere and cops just come running down the street with their little drone or their robots, instead of arriving in vehicles and chasing you and whatever. And it also means that if you want to escape the police, or any enemies for that matter, any gang members, whatever enemies you may be fighting outdoors, can easily be escaped just by getting in a car and driving away. There's basically nothing they could do about this, as they have no vehicles and they have no way to chase you. It's a fundamental thing that's just sort of broken within the game, and I think we really need some kind of chase AI. As well, it wouldn't completely fix the policing system. It would make everything about it feel better and just play better. And it wouldn't allow the player to escape the police so easily, because right now they're sort of a non-factor in the game. So continuing with the problems, we have apartments. So it's great to add these apartments. It's great to add the customization to the apartments where you change the color schemes, but at this point apartments still have absolutely no use, other than, I suppose we have one use now, which is changing our appearance. There's no reason to ever go back to your apartment. Through my first playthrough of the game, I don't think I ever did, unless it was for some specific quests have you go back to your apartment. But those specific story quests are just going to have you go back to your first apartment still. They're not going to change the scenes and take them to the new apartments. So even though you can buy these apartments, there is absolutely no use for them. I like the new apartments. I like some of the stuff that's inside of them. You can play guitar in one. There's a decent amount of little interactable objects and some of the more expensive ones. But yeah, overall there's just not much that they add, not much you can do with them. And lastly, we have something that everyone's been clamoring for since the game came out, and that is a transmog or an outfit system. We're all still looking like real goofy, ugly people with just the weirdest outfits you've ever seen to get the best defense. Even more so in Cyberpunk because of just the ridiculousness of a lot of its outfits. And it just seems strange to me that they haven't added it, since it seems like such a small, easy thing that they could add. You know, this is something that's been around in games for a long time. MMORPGs, ARPGs, it seems to be a standard. But for some reason, these single-player, open-world RPGs don't ever seem to want to add it, which I really don't get. It just... the only thing it does is allows people to roleplay the person they want to be, rather than just equip the best armor that they have. And if they're continuing to try to make the game more immersive, offer more ways to roleplay your character, I think that this is an addition that they should think about really making, as well as one I know the community really wants. But despite these lingering issues, overall, I think patch 1.5 has really made this game into what it should have been at launch, and made it into a fantastic, really immersive open-world RPG that CD Projekt can be proud of. I've always thought the writing, the animations, some of the role-playing elements were really good in this game, as well as some of the cinematography and even the gameplay and the amount of different options you have in that. I've always thought that at its core this is a really good game and does some unique things that I think set it apart. And I think patch 1.5 has showed this game finally meeting its potential on these next-gen consoles. So if it wasn't clear already, if you own any of the next-gen consoles, Series S, Series X, or PS5, I would definitely recommend Cyberpunk 2077 now that the next-gen patch 1.5 is out. I think it's a great experience if you enjoy open-world RPGs or open-world action games in general. Although if you are on PS4, Xbox One, I definitely cannot recommend this game. I cannot recommend Cyberpunk 2077. It never should have been released on those older consoles, and it still shows to this day that it shouldn't have been released. It's highly unplayable, and I wouldn't recommend them on those. But new consoles, go for it. So this has been my unscripted initial impressions of Cyberpunk 2077's patch 1.5 on an Xbox Series S. Tell me in the comments what you think of patch 1.5 and my thoughts on it. If you enjoyed the video, drop us a like, and if you want to see more stuff like this, subscribe to the Brevosity. I have two quest analysis series, one for Cyberpunk 2077 and one for Fallout New Vegas. It's a scripted series where I look at specific quests and sort of analyze them and talk about how they are compared to other quests from RPGs or just other quests from those games. I also have me and Nate's review discussions, which are full review discussions between me and him. We're just anything unique that sparks both of our interests, usually co-op games. So subscribe if you want to see stuff like that, and we'll see you next time.